Assalamualaikum and good morning to Dr. Muslin and fellow classmates. Today we are going to present on gender bias and stereotypes for the class. We have divided our contents into demographic, era, and issues in existing representations. Alright, moving on. I am Nurul Naazira Binti Azemin and I will be presenting on gender bias and stereotypes in terms of demographics. I have divided the discussion of female stereotypes into the African American and Asian demographic. After that, we will compare male and female writers' projections of females in literature in order to understand gender bias. The first female stereotypes parent in the African American and Asian demographic is the mammy and the tiger mom. The mammy stereotype places black women in an instrumental light where they would self-sacrifice themselves for their oppressors. It creates the false expectations that black women live to carry other people's burden and become an emotional punching bag for their sake. On the other hand, the tiger mom stereotype pictures an unrelenting, demanding Asian mother that focuses on their children's scholastic achievements. This abusive kind of tough love denies Asian women representation of their capabilities of warm love. The second representation of female stereotypes that exist in African American and Asian demographic is the sapphire and the kitten. The sapphire stereotype was meant to singularize black women as uncouth, angry, and loud while demanding their rights. It also pictures black women as uneducated, and therefore their opinions should not be heard. In contrast, Asian women are subjected to the kitten stereotype where they are characterized as meek, subservient, and needs rescuing. It perpetuates that Asian women are damsels in distress or hover in childlike naivety. The third black female stereotype is the Jezebel. The term was used in biblical stories to describe fallen women that are considered to be promiscuous. It hypersexualizes black women and therefore makes it acceptable for them to be raped because they are stereotyped to enjoy sex. On the other hand, Asian women are portrayed as opportunistic dragon ladies that are also hedonistic. It perpetuates Asian women as cunning, strategic, and crazy for materialistic gains. It is almost like Asian women are cold creatures that would risk anything for their benefits. The fourth black female stereotype is the matriarch, and it normalizes the absence of male leaders in households. This perpetuates that black women are vulnerable and can be taken advantage of. On the other spectrum, Asian women are portrayed as the millennial, outgoing Asian woman that adopts a gangster aesthetic personality known as the Asian baby girl in order to appear tough. This forces normalization of the exotic colored girl. These compilation of stereotypes shows that usually, on top of having to surpass female stereotypes such as the naggy housewife or the damsel in distress, women of color will also need to overcome xenophobic projections imposed on them by colonialist writers in Hollywood, Broadway, and sometimes even writers within their demographic. In fact, These writers also usually fetishizes colored women and in a way painted them as subhuman by using animal or cautionary tale names like the Jezebel, the tiger, or the dragon. Lastly, gender bias towards female manifests quite differently through the lenses of female and male writers. Female writers usually include the perspective of obstacles from the feminine eye, which will usually include acts of resistance, and sexuality is reclaimed as part of womanhood. For an example, in reading Lolita in Tehran, written by Azar Nafisi, the narrator pictured herself as a ghost in her black chador in order to transcend her. For an example, in reading Lolita in Tehran, written by Azar Nafisi, the narrator pictured herself as a ghost in her black chador in order to transcend her humanly form so that she may reclaim herself from female sexualizations happening under the regime of Ayatollah Khomeini. Male writers, on the other hand, tends to project women as one-dimensional according to their fantasies, and there will be hypersexualizations of women as an imposed standard. For an example, male graphic novel or comic writers are more likely to portray women using an unachievable standard by drawing ridiculously curvy and submissive women in their mediums. There is more variety to the types of male body compared to the types of female body. Now, these stereotypes are harmful because, first, it creates false expectations or underestimations of women by reducing genders to one-dimensional stereotypes. And second, it undermines society's capabilities to look beyond genders by encouraging logical fallacies done through equalizing gender with their superficial capabilities. In fact, in a social experiment where children were asked to draw firemen, they are more likely to draw firemen as males instead of females. Scientists, in fact, had connected that this is due to the lack of representation of women in that job. Therefore, in order to dismantle these stereotypes, I believe that we must include representations of women from both culture that broke the boundaries set by Hollywood, Broadway, and the media in general. That's all from me. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Nur Atikah Kamarazaman, and I'll be presenting on gender bias and female stereotypes in different eras. We have decided to look at these different eras according to the waves of feminism, which are time periods during which women fought for the elevation of their status in the society. During every wave, women fought for different changes, which means they resisted against different underlying gender bias and female stereotypes. Therefore, I will be dissecting the underlying gender bias and female stereotypes that were combated during the first and second wave feminism. We're also going to look at how the literature that was published around the time of each wave portrays some of the stereotypes. Now, without further ado, let's look at the first wave feminism. The primary focus of first wave feminism was politics, emphasizing on women's suffrage or voting rights. At that time, women suffered from disenfranchisement, which means they had absolutely no power in politics. Other discriminations battled during first wave feminism include women's deprivation of rights in marital laws and child custody. Women were not allowed to file for divorce, and should they ever get a divorce, they were automatically denied child custody. So, a woman's child would never become hers, it would eventually become her husband's. Moving on, women also had no rights to own any sort of properties, but they were always the property of somebody else's, particularly their fathers and their husbands. So going back to the primary goal of the first wave feminism, which was women's suffrage, it led to the formation of important bodies such as the National American Women's Suffrage Association in 1869. So suffragists engaged in a lot of public protests and demonstrations, and the society at that time perceived all of these retaliations as unladylike or tainting the cult of domesticity. Even when NAASA received support from Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU, the basis of their support was rooted in their belief that women should be in the public sphere or politics simply because they are morally superior and they can become citizen mothers to the society. There's something problematic with this, and we're going to dissect it in the next slide. Now that we know the kind of discriminations confronted during first wave feminism, let's look at the underlying gender bias and female stereotypes. The gender bias is blatant in all of these three aspects: politics, marriage, and family. Men held powerful positions in all of these three horizons where they could decide what happens in politics, they could decide what happens in a marriage, and after that, women, on the other hand, were utterly powerless. Now let's look at the female stereotypes that were confronted during first wave feminism. Firstly, since women were not allowed to partake in politics and other legal matters, it goes to show that the society stereotyped them as not competent, or at least not as competent as men. Their voice, their insights and opinions, sentiments were not sought after in these important matters. Next, since women were always their husbands' or their father's properties, this shows that the society perceived them as helpless or dependent, someone who could not decide for themselves, and would always require a man to guide her or control every aspect of her life. The society also attributed stereotypical docility to these women. As I have mentioned previously, suffragists were accused of acting unladylike because of their protests. The hackneyed idea of women sitting pretty, biting their tongue, and submitting to whatever discriminative circumstance they were put in was so idealized that the moment they finally stood up for themselves, they were accused of tainting an image that was only socially constructed to begin with. Women were also pigeonholed into the stereotypical role of a nurturer. Remember when WCTU supported NAASA because they believed that women could become citizen mothers who could disseminate positive influence on the society? Well, I think it is pretty ironic. Those women were fighting for their voting rights, but they were still expected to become a mother or a nurturer. Why can't these women fight for their rights because they deserve those rights and not because they are more suited to play the role of a mother to the society? These female stereotypes seem to be imitated in a lot of the literature in the 19th century. One of the most widely propagated stereotype in literature at that time was the angel in the house. This was popularized by the title of a poem by Coventry Petmore. In the poem, Petmore wrote about his wife who knows no selfishness or anger, therefore romanticizing submissiveness in women. Angels in the house are characterized as powerless, meek, passive, graceful, sympathetic, self-sacrificing, and pure. So it became a symbol of marital success if a man's wife fulfills all of these criteria of an angel. We can also see some of the female stereotypes that we have discussed so far in a Norwegian play by Henrik Ibsen called A Doll's House. This is one of my favorite plays that we have learned. In A Doll's House, the protagonist is Nora Helma, who is a very domestic woman, cares very deeply for her family, but is often looked down by her husband Torvald. To Torvald, Nora is powerless, incompetent, and completely dependent on him, and he views her as an object that he can control, trap, and assert dominance over. But in the final act of the play, the table is turned, and Nora finally asserts herself for the first time and acknowledges how the men in her life have treated her as a property, a doll. And so she delivers this really powerful line that you can see on the slide right now. But Torvald is taken aback by this change in his wife, and he starts to question her morality, her faith, and her sacred duty as his wife, and also the mother to their children. Now let's look at second wave feminism. The second wave feminism broadened the feminist scope to more personal issues. Some of the discriminations battled during this second wave is women's reproductive captivity, which has a lot to do with their lack of freedom to make decisions regarding childbearing. Apart from that, there was also this issue of scarce employment among women, and also a jarring wage gap between men and women. During World War II, the men had to be away to serve in defense forces, so the women were employed to work in factories. However, once the war ended, the women were fired from their positions and replaced by the men who were returning. So it created a low employment rate among women and then a huge wage gap between men and women. So having lost their jobs at the factories, the women were forced to go back to domesticity and resume their role as a loyal and subjugated housewife. Here we can see more gender bias and female stereotypes. The gender bias is now more apparent in the context of employment. So employment and wage were immensely biased towards the male community. I believe that the society at that time treated women as merely temporary replacements from men, and they could be discarded when their service was no longer needed. Now let's look at the female stereotypes that were confronted during second wave feminism. The first one is a still lingering female stereotype of women being caretakers or housewives. So the society still perceived women's role as purely decorative and domestic. Secondly, women also struggled with the stereotypical image of a two-legged womb. Women were defined and bounded by their reproductive capacities, which took away their freedom to make decisions for their own bodies, such as having abortions or taking contraceptive pills. This problematic stereotype of a woman being a two-legged womb was portrayed in one of the dystopian novels published in the 20th century, which is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. So in the novel, the handmaids were responsible for childbearing for elite couples who had troubles conceiving. So they were sexually enslaved and forced to have sex with these married men with their wives watching in the background. In the novel, the stereotype was so institutionalized because the women in the society were brainwashed into accepting this stereotype from an early age, with the society teaching them that they were only ever destined to become childbearers. That's all for my part of the presentation. Thank you so much for watching. Shazli, Camilla, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Atikah, for passing the floor to me. Hello everyone, I am Camilla. And right now I'll be presenting on the gender bias and female stereotypes that are found during the third and fourth waves of feminism. So now let's begin by looking at the third wave of feminism. Third wave happened during the 1990s until the early 2000s. So they realized that in the previous movements, feminists somehow failed to include the whole female community who are of different class, race, and also beliefs. Therefore, they started the third wave of feminism to include everyone, in the movement to together question, reclaim, and also redefine womanhood with the help of media and also technology. Alright, now let's have a look at some of the discriminations battle. Firstly, they fought against patriarchy. Sadly, this is one of the things that feminists have fought against for such a long time. But then, during that time, men were still more dominant. Hence, why feminists still brought this issue up. Okay, so in order to combat, they used irony through media and also produced stories of survival to actually inspire the public. Next, they fought against sexual confinement. Women want to be free from being associated to certain qualities. So, and also they want to be able to freely express their sexual needs without being labeled as such words such as whore or slut. Sorry. So they even use these words to publicly criticize others, in which they display these names, these words in movements. So as you can see from the picture itself, it's stated that slut pride. Okay. So lastly, in this era, they fought for intersectionality. As mentioned earlier, feminists before this, they overlooked on to some women who faced other oppression, such as against their race, class, and also beliefs. Hence, intersectionality existed, in which they acknowledge everyone's experiences going through discriminations and oppression. So during this era, feminists fought for intersectionality as an initiative to help everyone to claim justice for themselves. Now, let's have a look at where the gender bias was mostly found. So during that time, gender bias treatments were seen in the public itself because somehow people have started to show discriminations onto women openly, especially onto those who are less privileged, such as Muslims or women of color. So now, next, let's have a look at the female stereotypes that are found during that time. Firstly, confined to femininity. Women were somehow ought to follow a framework set by the society, or else they will be criticized badly. So they always want women to be polite and also sit still and look pretty, basically. And the next stereotype found is that women of other races do not matter in the society. As we are aware by now, third wave focuses on including everyone, including all race, class, and beliefs by lifting their voices and stories. So at that time, the less fortunate ones were mostly discriminated as they were somehow seen as irrelevant. Lastly, let's have a look at the literature during this era. So since 1990s were the years where media and technology are growing vastly, a lot of books, movies, or films had improved their way of portraying women in their storylines. So for example, Anastasia. It is also a princess movie. However, it's not that typical one that adheres to a damsel in distress plot. Okay? Even though towards the end, well, yes, she did find her lover, but she was still considered a feminist princess because of her character, basically. She is confident, outspoken, independent, and basically she has a strong character. So her ability to actually save her own life and also her lover's life in the presence of the villain who tried to kill them had somehow broke the common stereotypes being imposed onto women. They always thought that women would be the one who needs the help, who will be saved by the prince. But it's the other way around in this story. Okay? So, Anastasia is a powerful movie that aids in liberating women from stereotypes and also biases. Finally, let's have a look at the fourth wave of feminism. So, it started in 2012 until the present time with the main focus on women empowerment. So, during this time, a lot of women have already become leaders or influential figures that people look up to, regardless of their gender, their race, or beliefs. So, unfortunately, women still received hate and criticism from people via online or face-to-face. Hence, why the fourth wave feminism started. Now, let's have a look at the discriminations battle. Firstly, they fought against sexual harassment and assault. So nowadays, there are a lot of cases regarding these that many women have received not only from strangers but even from their own friends. Okay? But thankfully, women have become more vocal in sharing their experiences, as this is one of the ways to actually help in creating awareness and also a safe space for other women to open up. Next, they fought for equal opportunities. Since the start of fourth wave era, women have become more powerful and independent. However, some employers, they feel intimidated, maybe. So that is why they still discriminate their female employees by not providing equal opportunities for them. So even in politics, women were still being discriminated for participating. Finally, they fought against body shaming culture. Sadly, even until now, people still expect women to be all Barbie-like and follow a certain ideal type of body to be beautiful and socially accepted. However, through this movement, a lot of women, even celebrities, have become inspired to be in their own skin, and they use their online platforms to post pictures of themselves without being photoshopped and without wearing makeup, just so that they could spread awareness that it is okay for everybody, women and men, to be in their skin. Next, let's have a look at where the gender bias is found. So during this time, as we all know, women have become more influential and powerful, and since they are more vocal about their choices and rights, a lot of discriminations occurred too, especially in politics, business, and also in the public itself. Be it online or offline, women are being called out almost every time they try to claim justice for themselves. Moving on, these are some of the underlying female stereotypes that are found. Firstly, it is the mentality of some people on how women can easily be treated as they please. If a woman wears something that exposes just a little bit of their skin, they would simply be catcalled and objectified. Women could not even feel safe walking alone nowadays, as there are so many sexual harassment cases that happen. Next stereotype is physical appearances are what determine one's worth and beauty. A lot of people have been body shaming women online and offline for being in their own skin and for not having a model-like body. So This makes a lot of women feel insecure, and some of them even had depression and anxiety because they worry too much about the way they look. Okay? And lastly, women are not capable of leading. So women, they are always being associated with being too emotional or too unstable to lead. So women who leads often receive hatred from the society because they feel intimidated by their gender as well as because of their strong character. Finally, let's have a look at the literature found that adheres to the fourth wave feminism's agenda. So the book is called Dumpling, written by Julie Murphy. It is later being developed as a film on Netflix. Okay, so Dumpling is such a powerful movie or book that inspires women to be confident in their own skin and to love their body regardless of how it is. It also teaches women to realize that just because you do not follow the beauty standard doesn't mean that you are less beautiful. And it emphasizes on how beauty does not solely depend on appearances, but it is way beyond that. And a beautiful mind is actually something that makes someone beautiful. Alright, we've come to the end of me and Atikah's part. In conclusion, feminism is not something bad as some people might perceive it, and I really hope that one day everyone can start to treat each other fairly and kindly so that we can live harmoniously and just so that everyone, not only women, it's actually everyone, can finally stop attending protests just for the sake of claiming rights and justice for themselves. Okay, with that, I pass the floor to one Fawwaz.
Hello everyone, my name is Fawwaz and I'm going to continue the last part of the presentation, which is issues in existing representations. So before we start off with the main points, it is worth looking and pondering the question of why is it even after 4 waves of feminism which went on for generations, inequality towards women is still happening. So one of the main reasons of why this inequality is still happening is probably because maybe feminism is being misrepresented by our current generation, right? Which brings us to the first main issue, which is a misrepresentation of feminism in modern literature or in movies. However, it's worth noting that not all movies are misrepresenting feminism because we have so many that did represent feminism in a very good way, in a very good light. But the ones that do not, or the ones that misrepresent feminism, they stood out and it caught the eye of the current generation. So when this happens, it eventually changes the mindset of the people towards the idea of feminism itself. Or worse, the core of feminism could be forgotten and people eventually not know what feminism really stood for in the end. Now let's take a look at gender flipping in movie remakes. So what we have here on the slides are 2 movie franchises, which is the Ghostbusters and the Oceans movie series. So these movies were originally made with an all-male cast, but were then replaced with an all-female cast instead. So what the movies are trying to send a message is that women can do anything that men can do. If men can pull a heist, or if men can fight ghosts, then women can do the same too. However, just because they send this message of women can do anything that men can do doesn't mean that they're sending the message of feminism. So feminism at its core is about equality of men and women, not sameness. So here, instead of feminizing masculinity, we're seeing an attempt to masculinize femininity instead, because we can see here that they're not just they're putting women into male role types, but not what female role types instead. So just because they feature more women, just because they feature these films with women leading the cast, they're telling the same old lucrative stories with the same values, which is preaching masculinity, but in a light where a female is leading that masculinity instead. So this sends the message of women can be visible in front of camera as long as they stick to stories written by men and originally played by men, they just have to be better at it. So this is a type of feminism that we would not want to be embedded in our younger generation. All right. Now let's take a look at the next slide, which is neoliberal feminism. So basically what neoliberal is, it emphasizes on the importance of self-reliance and self-efficiency. So neoliberal feminism is an individualized and internalized form of feminism, which is where they focus on an individual only, not a community. So the question here is it enough by just acknowledging the problem of inequality happening, but leaving the responsibility on the individual only? Okay, so now let's take a look at the representation in movies that show neoliberal feminism. So the first movie that showed neoliberal feminism is Wonder Woman. So the movie highlights on how Diana Prince fought her way through male-dominated power structures. So throughout the movie, she fought soldiers, she fought male soldiers, she fought bad guys, which are males. So she did everything by herself, and she didn't really have to rely on anything or anyone. So here it is shown that her accomplishment is for her own betterment, but not for all women. And yeah, this contemporary, Wonder Woman is an example of a contemporary female superhero movie, among all others. So these movies, they dazzle us with the ability to do and be everything. If we were only to fully optimize and empower ourselves, only then can we be like them. So if you do not have superpower heroes, or if you do not have if you do not have superpowers, then it is quite impossible for you to liberate yourself and escape from all this masculinity. So yeah, now let's take a look at the next movie, which is Mulan. So Mulan, the new version, or the 2020 version of Mulan, also portrayed neoliberal feminism. So the movie highlights on how Mulan is special because she possesses chi, which can only be found in men. So this chi made her stood out of all other women. That is what makes her special. So instead of rising from no one or from a normal woman to fighting her way to become a stronger woman, it is implied that Mulan is special because she has chi in her, and the chi can only be found in men, but Mulan is special, so that's why she's in the forefront of the movie. So basically, the movie Mulan is showing radical individualism, which is the most popular trope that's being put in superheroes, where you as the hero, you have to stand alone to face the enemy. So this actually reflects the narrative of neoliberalism, neoliberal feminism, that shows you are responsible for your own success, and if you fail, you have nobody to blame but yourself. Okay, so this is the misrepresentation of feminism that is being fed in modern movies. So when feminism is being misrepresented in movies, they eventually affect real life. So now let's take a look at where feminism took a wrong turn, especially in real life situations. It is widely misunderstood that feminists are men haters or feminists are those who hate men. So this is not true, because what these people actually are, they're misandrists. So misandrists are those who practice misandry, which is the act of hating men. It's pretty much the same with misogyny, but misandry is the female version of it. So to further emphasize, I would like to show you a video on a Russian activist called Anna Dukalyuk, who actually went into a subway train along with her team of feminists, male and female feminists. So what they did was they went on into the subway station, or subway train, and poured bleach on random men's pants. So they did this for no reason whatsoever, just because they feel that they hate men and they feel like these people are sitting improperly, so they feel like they need to do something. So that's what they did. They poured bleach. So this act actually imposes that feminists hate men. So when they hate men, they will do whatever it takes to to harass men instead. So this is a very very negative example, and the sad thing is it's one of the forefront of sending the message of what feminism is itself. So it's pretty sad to see feminism is being misrepresented in this kind of way when the real idea of feminism is something different. So from the video, I would like to highlight this quote by Dave Chappelle. So he's a comedian. So this quote is from one of his shows, which he said, "We got all the bad guys scared, and that's good. But the minute they're not scared anymore, it will get worse than it was before. Fear does not make lasting peace," which I 100% agree with what he said. I mean, it's good that we're cultivating a culture where sexual harassers and bad guys who look down on women should be called out and hated. It's good. I mean, I agree, because it makes them scared and it makes them, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. But it can only last so long. I mean, if they can't do it in public, they can still do it in private with their partners, with their families. So we don't want this to happen. So it needs to be more than just spewing hate. It needs to be at a level where we could actually change the system or the mindset or the education on how gender should be treated equally. Okay. Which brings us to the next point, which is focusing on what matters most. So instead of the focus of feminism should be on eradicating the gender inequality that's happening, eradicating the patriarchy that's happening, giving equal chances for women to lead in politics. So it would be the question, or the focus should be on envisioning on what would it seem like if all girls are given access to education. These girls in Africa, in countries like India, Pakistan, where the normal stereotype is that women should stay at home and not go to school. So this is what the idea of feminism should be focused on, and not on things that not on things like hating men or whatsoever. It should be channeled in the right direction. Hence, the implications of feminism itself is that it's all about gender equality, and it's not just about women. Feminism applies to both male and female, so it's not all about women. The next thing is that the goal of feminism is to have no one living life by taking advantage of the other gender. The mindset should be that. And the last but not least is that feminism is everyone's responsibility, not just women. Okay. To end this presentation, I would like to quote G.D. Anderson. So she said that feminism isn't about making women stronger. Women are already strong. It's about changing the way the world it's about changing the way the world perceives that strength. So it is time that we change our mindset on how feminism should work and who should be responsible in spreading the idea of feminism itself. So yeah, I think that marks the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.